Did you know the king of rock and roll had flops? Ever wondered which Elvis songs barely made a dent on the charts? Number 1. Clean Up Your Own Backyard. 1969. Ever heard this Elvis tune? Probably not, and there's a reason for that. Clean Up Your Own Backyard was released in June 1969 as part of the soundtrack for the film The Trouble with Girls. The song struggled to gain traction on the charts, peaking at a disappointing number 35 on the Billboard Hot 100. This marked one of Elvis's worst performances for a single during the late 1960s, a period when he was working hard to reclaim his musical throne after years of making movies. The track featured Elvis delivering social commentary, something that didn't always resonate with his core fan base. With lyrics advising listeners to fix their own problems before criticizing others, the message may have been sound, but the song's bluesy gospel-tinged arrangement failed to capture public imagination. Radio stations gave it minimal airplay, and despite being featured in the film, the song quickly disappeared from public consciousness. Music critics at the time noted that the production seemed rushed, and Elvis himself reportedly wasn't particularly enthusiastic about the recording sessions. The single's B-side, The Fair's Moving On, didn't generate any additional interest either. RCA Records had anticipated better performance, especially since Elvis was in the midst of his famous comeback period. His legendary 1968 television special had aired just months before, and expectations were high for all new Elvis material. But Clean Up Your Own Backyard became one of several soundtrack singles that failed to capitalize on the renewed energy surrounding Elvis's career at that time. Number 2. I'm Leavin', 1971. Have you ever felt the heartbreak in Elvis's voice? You might have missed it in this forgotten gem. Released in June 1971, I'm Leavin' represented Elvis's foray into more contemporary folk rock sounds. The song peaked at a mere number 36 on the Billboard Hot 100 and quickly fell off the charts. Written by Michael Jarrett and Sonny Charles, the track featured a softer, more introspective Elvis than fans were accustomed to hearing. While critically praised for its emotional depth and Elvis's nuanced vocal performance, the buying public simply didn't connect with this change of direction. Elvis's record label, RCA, reportedly didn't promote the single with the same vigor as his more mainstream releases. Radio programmers were unsure where to place the song in their rotations. It wasn't upbeat enough for pop stations, yet wasn't country enough for that format either. Elvis himself was said to have been particularly fond of the recording. In studio sessions, he reportedly demanded multiple takes, until he felt he'd captured the right emotional quality. This personal attachment made the commercial failure even more disappointing for him. The single's poor performance came during a transitional period in Elvis's career. He had stopped making movies and was focusing solely on music again, but was struggling to find consistent commercial success outside of his live performances. I'm Leavin' has since become appreciated by Elvis aficionados as an artistic success, if not a commercial one. Number 3. You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, 1970. Can a cover song flop even when the original was a hit? In Elvis's case, absolutely. Released in May 1970, Elvis's version of You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, a song previously made famous by Dusty Springfield, peaked at number 11 on the Billboard Hot 100, which might seem respectable until you consider Elvis's typical chart performance. For an artist who regularly dominated the top 5 positions and often claimed number 1, This relatively modest showing represented a significant commercial disappointment. The song failed to connect with audiences in the way his label had anticipated, especially considering it was a proven hit in another artist's hands. Elvis recorded the song during his famous marathon sessions at American Sound Studio in Memphis. While the recording coaxed his powerful vocals, critics noted that it lacked the emotional vulnerability of Springfield's original version. Radio stations gave it moderate airplay, but it didn't generate the excitement of his earlier hits or even contemporaneous releases. Record buyers seemed largely indifferent, and the single sold significantly fewer copies than projected. This period marked a challenging time for Elvis in terms of chart relevance. The music landscape was changing rapidly, with psychedelic rock, hard rock, and early heavy metal gaining popularity. Elvis's more traditional approach, even when applying his considerable talents to contemporary material, sometimes struggled to break through. Number 4, My Way, 1977. What happens when the king takes on Sinatra's signature song? In the case of Elvis's version of My Way, released in late 1977 shortly after his death, the answer was a surprisingly tepid commercial response. The single peaked at number 22 on the Billboard Hot 100, respectable for most artists, but underwhelming for a posthumous release from one of music's biggest icons. Elvis had performed My Way regularly in his concerts, and this studio version was expected to become a poignant farewell hit. The song seemed perfectly suited for Elvis's life story, a man who truly did things his way throughout his career. However, the single failed to capture the public's imagination in the way RCA Records had anticipated. The timing of the release may have worked against it. Released amid a flood of reissued Elvis material following his death, My Way got somewhat lost in the shuffle. Additionally, Frank Sinatra's iconic version was so deeply embedded in popular culture that even Elvis's powerful rendition struggled to establish its own identity. Critics generally praised Elvis's emotional delivery, noting that the lyrics seemed especially poignant given his recent passing. But radio programmers gave it only moderate support, perhaps feeling that the song's message was too similar to other Elvis ballads already in rotation. Sales were disappointing compared to expectations for a posthumous release during the massive outpouring of grief for Elvis. Record buyers seemed to prefer revisiting his classic hits rather than embracing this new interpretation of a song so closely associated with another musical legend. Number 5. Kentucky Rain, 1970. Ever wondered how a song about searching for lost love through a downpour could leave listeners dry? Kentucky Rain, released in January 1970, exemplifies an Elvis single that underperformed despite its quality. The song peaked at number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100, which represented a disappointing showing for Elvis during this period of his career. Written by Eddie Rabbitt and Dick Hurd, Kentucky Rain featured a compelling narrative about a man desperately searching for his lost love through stormy weather. Elvis delivered a passionate vocal performance backed by the powerful piano playing of Ronnie Milsap, who would later become a country music star in his own right. Critics praised the song's atmosphere and Elvis's emotional delivery, but radio stations gave it only moderate support. Coming off several bigger hits, expectations were high for Kentucky Rain, making its modest chart performance feel like a letdown for his record label. The single sold adequately but fell well short of the million-plus sales that Elvis's biggest hits typically achieved. The record-buying public seemed somewhat indifferent to what many Elvis historians now consider one of his most compelling vocal performances from this era. This relative commercial disappointment is particularly surprising, given that Kentucky Rain had all the elements that usually spelled success for Elvis: a strong narrative, excellent production from Chips Moman, and Elvis's full emotional investment in the material. Yet somehow, it failed to connect with audiences at the level RCA had anticipated. Number 6. Burning Love, 1972. Surprised to see this one on the list. How could one of Elvis's most recognized songs be considered a commercial disappointment? The answer lies in timing and context. Released in August 1972, Burning Love peaked at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. An impressive showing for most artists, but a letdown for Elvis and his label, who had anticipated his triumphant return to the number 1 position. Burning Love would be Elvis's last top 10 hit during his lifetime, making its failure to reach number 1 particularly significant in his chart history. The song was held off from the top spot by Chuck Berry's novelty song, My Ding-a-Ling, a fact that reportedly frustrated Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Elvis initially didn't care for the song and needed convincing to record it. His reluctance may have affected his promotion of the single, as he rarely performed it with the same enthusiasm as his other hits during his concerts in this period. Despite being a rock-oriented track that took-aid Elvis at his most energetic in years, radio support was not unanimous across all markets. Some pop stations found it too aggressive compared to his ballads, while rock stations were increasingly focused on harder rock acts of the early 1970s. The sales figures, while strong, fell short of the multi-million selling singles of Elvis's peak years. The record-buying public responded positively, but not enthusiastically enough to push it past Chuck Berry's novelty hit to claim the top spot. This near miss represented one of Elvis's last chances to reclaim his crown as the king of the charts. Number 7. Suspicion, 1964. Did you know Elvis recorded this song first? But someone else had the hit. Suspicion, originally recorded by Elvis in 1962, was released as a single in March 1964, only after Terry Stafford's cover version began climbing the charts. Elvis's version was rushed out to compete, but peaked at a disappointing number 103 on the Billboard Bubbling Under chart. The song had been included on Elvis's Potluck album in 1962, but RCA hadn't seen single potential in it until Stafford's version proved them wrong. The hasty release as a single backfired, as Elvis's version failed to capture public interest despite being the original recording. Terry Stafford's version, which many listeners initially thought was Elvis, reached number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. The irony wasn't lost on Elvis or his management. Another artist had a massive hit with a song Elvis had recorded years earlier but never released as a single. Radio stations largely ignored Elvis's version, already committed to playing Stafford's take, which had built momentum. Record buyers similarly showed little interest in purchasing a single of a song that many already owned on Elvis's Potluck album. This commercial disappointment came during the peak of Beatlemania, when Elvis was primarily focused on his movie career rather than maintaining his chart dominance. The failure of Suspicion to compete with Stafford's version highlighted how Elvis's tight control over single releases, usually waiting until a movie was released, sometimes meant missing opportunities. Number 8. The Girl of My Best Friend, 1976. Can a song be re-released and still flop twice? In the case of The Girl of My Best Friend, the answer is yes. Originally recorded by Elvis in 1960 for his Elvis Is Back album, the song was belatedly released as a single in the UK in 1976, where it stalled at a disappointing number 9. The decision to release the 16-year-old track as a single came during a period when Elvis's new material was struggling to make an impact. RCA and Colonel Parker thought revisiting his classic sound might reignite interest, but the strategy proved only moderately successful. British radio gave it some airplay, driven by nostalgia, but the sound was markedly different from contemporary music of 1976. The disconnect between Elvis's early 1960s style and the musical landscape of the mid-1970s, dominated by disco, progressive rock and punk, was simply too great. Sales were modest, particularly compared to his previous UK releases. The British record-buying public showed polite interest, but little enthusiasm for this recycled album track, despite its quality and Elvis's pristine vocal performance. The relatively poor performance of The Girl of My Best Friend in 1976 demonstrated the challenges Elvis's team faced in maintaining his commercial relevance in the rapidly changing music scene of the mid-1970s. Even revisiting his classic sound couldn't guarantee hit status in a market that had moved on to new sounds and styles. Number 9. You'll Think of Me, 1969. Ever heard a B-side that should have been an aside? You'll Think of Me never got that chance. Released as the B-side to Suspicious Minds in 1969, this track received virtually no commercial attention, despite being a high-quality recording from Elvis's acclaimed Memphis sessions. The song, written by Morris Schumann, featured Elvis delivering an emotional vocal over a sophisticated arrangement that cockayed his artistic growth. However, being paired with Suspicious Minds, which would become one of Elvis's most iconic hits, ensured that You'll Think of Me would remain in the shadows. Radio stations focused exclusively on promoting Suspicious Minds, giving You'll Think of Me no airplay despite its quality. Record buyers purchased the single in massive numbers, but primarily for the A-side, making You'll Think of Me one of Elvis's least-heard recordings from this creatively fruitful period. The commercial neglect of You'll Think of Me was particularly unfortunate because it represented some of Elvis's most committed vocal work from the American Sound studio sessions. Producer Chips Moman had helped Elvis create a more contemporary sound, and this track exemplified their successful collaboration. The song's failure to gain any commercial traction represented a missed opportunity. Had it been released as an aside with proper promotion, music historians speculate it might have continued Elvis's streak of hits during his 1969 comeback period. Instead, it remains one of his hidden gems, largely unknown to casual fans. Number 10. Any Day Now, 1975. How can a classic song performed by a legendary artist fail to connect? Any Day Now, released in March 1975, provides a textbook example. Elvis's cover of this Chuck Jackson hit peaked at a dismal number 36 on the Billboard Hot 100, marking one of his poorest showings of the mid-1970s. Recorded during sessions at RCA's Hollywood studio, Elvis delivered a soulful, committed performance of the song. Critics noted that his voice was in excellent form, bringing emotional depth to the lyrics about anticipated heartbreak. However, the public response was tepid, at best. Radio programmers gave the single minimal airplay, finding it neither contemporary enough for pop radio nor traditional enough for country formats. The arrangement, while professional, lacked the innovative touch that had made earlier Elvis singles stand out from the crowd. Sales figures were disappointing, particularly compared to Elvis's standards. The record-buying public showed little interest, and the single quickly disappeared from what limited chart position it had achieved. Even Elvis's most dedicated fans didn't embrace this release with their usual enthusiasm. This commercial disappointment came during a challenging period in Elvis's career, when his health was declining and his studio work was becoming less consistent. Any Day Now represented one of several covers from this period that failed to revitalize his chart presence, despite the quality of his vocal performance. Number 11. If You Talk in Your Sleep. (1974). Can a song about secrets, revealed during slumber, put listeners to sleep instead? If You Talk in Your Sleep, released in May 1974, certainly seemed to have that effect on record buyers. The single peaked at number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100, which represented a significant commercial underperformance for an Elvis release during this period. Recorded at Stax Studios in Memphis, the song featured a funky rhythm-heavy arrangement that attempted to position Elvis within the contemporary sound of mid-1970s pop and R&B. Despite the modern production and Elvis's engaged vocal performance, the single failed to generate significant excitement. Critics were divided on the song's merits. Some praised Elvis's willingness to embrace current musical trends, while others felt the arrangement obscured his vocal strengths. Radio support was inconsistent with many stations, giving it only token airplay despite its chart-friendly sound. The sales figures fell well short of expectations, particularly given that this was meant to be a major single release rather than a movie tie-in or soundtrack cut. The record-buying public responded with relative indifference to what Elvis's label had hoped would be a significant chart comeback. This commercial disappointment occurred during Elvis's crucial Stax recording sessions, which were designed to update his sound and reconnect him with contemporary audiences. The relative failure of If You Talk in Your Sleep to achieve this goal represented a missed opportunity during a period when Elvis was making a genuine attempt to remain musically relevant. Number 12. It's Only Love, 1971. What happens when the king of rock and roll covers a country song without conviction? It's Only Love, released in October 1971, provides the answer. A chart disappointment. The single peaked at number 51 on the Billboard Hot 100, making it one of Elvis's worst-performing singles of the early 1970s. Originally recorded by B.J. Thomas, It's Only Love featured Elvis delivering a surprisingly restrained vocal over a country pop arrangement. Critics noted that he seemed to lack his usual emotional connection to the material, resulting in a recording that sounded professional but uninspired. Radio stations largely ignored the release, finding it neither compelling enough as a pop record nor authentic enough for country formats. The single received minimal airplay, quickly disappearing from the limited radio rotation it initially received. Sales figures were abysmal by Elvis's standards. The record-buying public showed virtually no interest in this release, and it quickly fell off the charts after its brief and modest peak. Even Elvis's devoted fan base seemed unmoved by this particular recording. This commercial failure came during a period when Elvis was recording prolifically but somewhat indiscriminately. Critics have suggested that It's Only Love represents a case of Elvis simply going through the motions, recording material selected by his management rather than songs that genuinely moved him as an artist. Number 13. Love Letters. 1966. Can a beautiful love song fall completely flat? In the case of Elvis's love letters, the answer was unfortunately yes. Released in June 1966, this single stalled at number 19 on the Billboard Hot 100, representing a significant commercial disappointment for an Elvis release during this period. A remake of a 1945 hit by Dick Haymes, Love Letters, featured a lush orchestral arrangement and one of Elvis's most tender vocal performances. The quality of the recording was undeniable, with critics praising Elvis's emotional delivery and the sophisticated production. Despite these artistic merits, radio stations gave the single only moderate support. Coming during the height of the British invasion and the emergence of psychedelic rock, Elvis's more traditional approach to this romantic ballad seemed somewhat out of step with the rapidly evolving musical landscape. Sales figures were mediocre by Elvis's standards, particularly disappointing given the quality of the recording. The record-buying public, increasingly drawn to newer sounds and artists, showed limited interest in this beautiful but stylistically conservative Elvis release. This commercial underperformance came during a challenging period, when Elvis was primarily focused on his movie career rather than maintaining his position on the music charts. Love Letters represents one of several quality recordings from this era that failed to achieve the commercial success they arguably deserved. Number 14. Frankie and Johnny, 1966. How can a song from the 1800s fail to connect with audiences in the 1960s? The answer seems obvious in retrospect, but Elvis's recording of the traditional folk song, Frankie and Johnny, provides a perfect case study. Released in March 1966, as the title track from one of his movies, the single peaked at a disappointing number 25 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song, with its vintage storyline about a woman who shoots her cheating lover, was given a mid-tempo arrangement that attempted to modernize it while retaining its traditional flavor. Critics noted the disconnect between the dated lyrics and Elvis's attempt to deliver them in a contemporary style. Radio programmers gave the single minimal support, finding it an awkward fit for the pop formats of 1966. The song received modest airplay initially due to Elvis's name recognition, but quickly disappeared from rotation as audience response proved tepid. Sales figures were well below expectations for an Elvis single, particularly one tied to a movie release. The record-buying public showed limited interest, and the single failed to generate the momentum needed for sustained chart success. This commercial disappointment exemplified the challenges Elvis faced during his movie years. Forced to record material that complemented the films rather than choosing songs based on artistic merit or commercial potential, Elvis often found himself releasing singles that failed to showcase his talents or connect with contemporary audiences. Number 15. Spin Out, 1966. Did you ever wonder what happens when the king releases a song even he doesn't seem to believe in? Spin Out, released in October 1966 as the title track to one of Elvis's many films, provides the answer. The single stalled at a disappointing number 40 on the Billboard Hot 100, making it one of his poorest performing singles of the 1960s. The upbeat car-themed song featured lightweight lyrics and the generic rock arrangement that seemed designed merely to fit the movie's racing theme rather than to stand as a memorable recording. Critics noted that Elvis delivered the vocals competently, but without the passion or commitment he brought to his best work. Radio stations gave the single minimal airplay, finding it unremarkable compared to both Elvis's earlier classics and the innovative pop and rock music dominating the airwaves in late 1966. The song quickly disappeared from what limited rotation it initially received. Sales figures were abysmal by Elvis's standards. The record-buying public showed little interest, and the single failed to generate momentum even among Elvis's dedicated fan base. The song's commercial failure reflected a growing disconnect between Elvis's movie soundtrack recordings and the rapidly evolving musical landscape. This chart disappointment came during the height of Elvis's Hollywood period, when his artistic choices were increasingly dictated by film requirements rather than musical considerations. Spin Out represents perhaps the most extreme example of Elvis releasing a song that seemed destined for commercial failure from its conception. A calculated movie tie-in rather than a genuine artistic statement. Would these forgotten tracks have fared better in another era or with different promotion? Could some of these commercial failures actually represent Elvis at his most authentic